Good afternoon, or good morning, or good evening, depending on what time zone you are. Hi, my name is Michael Stanley-Baker from Nanyang Technological University. I'm recording this by the side of the beach in Bali, where I am in the week before the trip to the conference in Dunedin. Hi, I just want to make a quick recording of the site where I'm making this video here in western Bali near Nagata. At my dad's coconut farm, actually, where I'm hoping to develop a small herbal project, possibly, just which will conclude the talk for today. I'll show how these historical data that I've been working with can also inform contemporary practice and use. And I'm going to be talking to you about some digital developments in that I've been working on here at NTU in the polyglot synonymy. I think most of you in the Zoom room will be familiar with some of my things. So, using digital mapping, I was able to discover where the early Bencao tradition emerged in this article. Came out last year, where I argue that it didn't emerge in the central plains of China, as had been previously argued, but rather by stepwise trading among small communities and microecologies and microcommunities along the Yellow River corridor and beyond. So one of the other features that the synonymy affords us is by introducing the provenance data which indicate the text in which a name first emerges in the tradition, we can periodize the evolution of the use of particular species, which aren't necessarily easily documented if you're using text-based dictionaries. So, for example, by with 10 to 15 minutes of looking around at all the different terms about cloves and the periods of when they emerged, by looking up each of these green dots boxes, which is the title of the text, and will reveal the date when you open it. We can sort of assemble a chronology, right? So we begin to see that seeds are first named in the 5th century, the bark becomes used in the 8th, the root becomes used in the 11th, the twigs become used in the 16th, and essential oils are brought in the 18th century. So there's this changing over time that we can easily describe over lots of different kinds of herbs, not just cloves today. And I'm going to look at one particular recipe, gui zhi tang. That's a cinnamon decoction, which is an old recipe dating from the 2nd century CE. And it's composed primarily of these 5 ingredients. And when you visualize the names in the database, you can see it looks like this. Here we have the species down here. Notice that Gancao has 3 different licorice species. The alternate names, those names that are highlighted in blue, have provenance data, so there are dates attached to those. Going through the other ingredients. This is jujube, and then cinnamon twigs. This one, baishao, is an interesting one because later in the 11th century, a distinction between the 2 different shao are brought out. Baishao and chishao, red and white peony root, which we'll talk about later. And here we have ginger, and then the final view. And so coming back to the main view, this is what you can see, what you've been able to see, and what's currently available online. Now, if we turn to the other database, Drugs Across Asia, China, we can also look up gui zhi tang, cinnamon twig decoction, and because it has been tagged, so you can see each chapter is divided into sections, and each section is divided into paragraphs. So at the paragraph level, within paragraphs, you also have tags. And within tags, for example, they identified cinnamon decoction as one of the categories. Having implemented the DocuSky, these texts into DocuSky enables us to extract all of the tags, and within those tags identify all of the drug terms using a massive search by throwing all the drug terms that we have in our records. And when we pull those out, what comes with them is metadata, the ontology, as it were, the digital ontology. So the author, the place of composition, the date, etc. Now we can take that highly enriched data and then put it into a graphical interface to explore and sort of study in a more humanistic way. And I'm going to demonstrate a little bit about how we do that. So when we plot the graph, the large darker dots are the text titles, and then attached to them are drug terms with characters and smaller, paler dots. And just using this kind of dragging technique, you can kind of begin to parse through and explore and clean up the data, and also introduce, you can also filter the data. So because what we want to find is variations on that basic recipe of 5 drugs, we can actually use the filter on the left-hand side to remove those main drugs, ginger and cinnamon and the others, from the graph. And therefore, all we're seeing then, what's left, is the variation. And then we begin to really see what's going on. So here's a close-up view of the filter, and you can see I've taken out 桂枝、甘草、芍药、生姜, and 大枣. So as you begin to see similarities, and these drugs will cluster close to the texts that they're common to. So this is very useful for seeing which texts have what in common, and you can begin to assemble your graph based on what you're seeing here. Now, another feature that you can use a different kind of filter is the time filter. This uses the metadata from DocuSky in the visualization. So you can see at the bottom here a timeline, and you see the blue highlight is the span of time that is being visualized onto the graph. And as we expand that graph, you can see more drugs and more text start popping up. And this is really useful for seeing the kind of emergence, literally, of the tradition on screen. And as you do that, you can then begin to pay attention to the date of it, maybe look at the author. You can go back to open another tab and check your text, what's going on, and then use this to kind of assemble texts that are coming up around the same time. Here's my lower left collection coming up around the same time, but also having similar drugs. And in this way, kind of assemble a little map for yourself, which is your own creation, but deeply informed by the contents of your materials. So once you've done that, you can kind of assemble these things as you see these clusters coming out by cross-referencing the titles, your knowledge of their genres, and their dating. So you can see, but in the bottom left, I've got texts which use the 加减, or sort of this principle of adding variants and name the variants of their recipes. I have a Tang Dynasty text and pediatrics texts coming out on the right-hand side, very closely following the Tang Dynasty Qianjin Feng. And then up at the top, you can see external medicine, and these texts emerge in the Qing Dynasty, which corresponds actually to the kind of professionalization of external medicine, where people began to use theoretical recipes. So this relates to Li Jianmin's work on anatomy and surgery. And then I mentioned white peony earlier, and you can see here on the left-hand side, there's the red peony, and on the right side, there's the white peony, and the texts which are aligning in those debates. So talking of digital ontologies, this is what the ontology of the polyglot synonymy 1.0 looked like. Because we want to tag the database thoroughly and in detail with single codes so that you can link from our text database out to the synonymy, we're cleaning up all the Chinese name data and found interesting issues with drug names. One is the problem of homonyms, of course, where you have the same common name, as in the top example, referring to multiple different drugs. Where these occur, we want to implement for the user a decision tree so that they can be aware that the herb name is a homonym, and then be guided towards more information so that they can adjudicate a decision about what is the best species to decide on. Because of the structure of Chinese the herb dictionaries, they may use an alternate name to list in the primary index the same drug, and so the same drug can be listed multiple times. So we've been identifying this and discovering where the names have been repeated and where that duplication has occurred, and therefore cleaning out some redundancies in dictionary data. Also, with the contributions from the University of Transdisciplinary Health, Sciences and Technology, or TDU, in Bangalore, and the great expertise of Varun Subramanya, we have ingested, or we're in the process of ingesting, about 72,000 drug names over 12 different South Asian languages, from Persian and Urdu, Sanskrit, Hindi, Malayalam, Arabic. And we've been having some, also want to thank Guy Atwell for his help checking the background of some of the data. So this results in a new ontology and mapping, different from the one you saw before, where we have homonyms and synonyms, which are branching between the Chinese alternate names and the Chinese primary names. We have the Straits Chinese data, which is from dictionaries, Chinese language dictionaries from Southeast Asia, and then our 12 South Asian languages down there on the bottom right. And then, so what I've been able to do is take guizhitang, right, those 5 main drugs, and then throw them at the synonymy, and then discover what drugs, what names we have for those drugs in South Asia. It turns out only 3: ginger, licorice, and cinnamon. And we can zoom in. We've just been figuring this out this week to look at a single species, and then you can see the different language names here, and then with their corresponding names in those languages branching out. We can take a moment to sort of zoom in and explore the data a little bit. You can see here we're zooming into the Kannada language and its corresponding terms there, and then we have Malayalam with its terms, Persian, and Marathi, and BOD stands for Tibetan, and Arabic. These are all terms for licorice. And then Hindi, and you'll notice when you look at the Hindi, you see there's a number of basically the same word with different spellings, right? Mulhati, Mulhati, Muleti. So these are different accents. These are artifacts partly of the transcription by the different dictionaries. Of course, this data is not just historical, it's also living languages. Here you see pictures of my students on the NTU campus in Singapore at our herb garden being taught by Uncle Bay how these plants, which are Malay plants, are described in Teochew, Hokkien, and Guangdonghua dialects. About 30 years ago, the Chinese Medical College up in Penang had an exhibition where they were describing Southeast Asian, Malaysian medicinal plants within the Chinese episteme. So this is a cross-epistemic translation that's going on down here in Malaysia, the Malaysian Peninsula. Here's Uncle Bay giving us students some samples. These are plants he's picked from the garden, which he's naming for us. I take all of these plants back to my classroom, have the students use the polyglot system to search up the plants and find out more information about them.
可以啊。
哎，可以。
那个树叶马兰。
树叶马兰。
啊，这个小柏骨。
小柏骨。
这个侧柏。
侧柏。
这个翼龙边。
翼龙边，啊哈。
这个满天星。
满天星。
这个白花野牡丹。
啊，好漂亮。
这个可以啊。
哎。Okay, so you get a sort of a sense of the kind of liveliness of the tradition. And students enjoy looking at the plants and then looking through the system to see what they can find out about them. Big data allows us to connect to other ongoing databases. There's currently like 11 or 12 now major Chinese medicine bioactivity databases, which are the cutting edge of traditional medicine development today. There are also local herbal products, natural products, which have been developed out of the garden, both on campus and outside in Singapore. These are local products, for example, made out of plants like this, Heimian Jiangjun, which proliferates in Southeast Asia. So this interlinked historical language information can also have modern-day applications. When I was visiting my father last year at the farm on the top left there on the map in Bali, I wanted to bring him some plants, which I discovered out of the natural products that were being developed in Singapore, what the species were. I looked them up in my database, and then was able to search for them and see which ones grow in Bali, all through links from the Polyglot website. I was then able to get onto social media and ask them where could I find this plant using the local Indonesian names or Malay names, and then they were able to tell me a place en route from the airport to the farm. here's our find. This is the gotu kola that I got from my dad for his birthday, and it's so this system and these exchanges, these cross-linguistics exchanges, are cross-epistemic exchanges, and I think the kind of tools that we're developing at Polyglot Medicine can help historians, modern policymakers, and modern day practitioners and users of the public. I hope the future of that will be able to be broad and as inclusive as possible. AI plant recognition apps like the one called Picture This could obviously be future tie-up integrations where you could go out into the wild, find a picture of a plant, and then find those names, put it into our system, and discover what its traditional uses were, and possibly go back and find textual records about that. Herbalists in North America are very interested in comparing the biotopes from where these drugs grew, which are described in the ancient records, and seeing what the comparable climates are abroad, for example, like in North America. So there's also impact to the wide propagation of the industry based out of historical, geographic, botanical records. So that's what Polyglot Asian Medicine is busy with. Thank you very much.